on the concluding part of the Rudra Gita, which is essentially the Falshruti, the benedictions by Lord Shiva, glorifying the prayer and one who chants the. So we'll resume from verse 71. Yogadesham upashadya dharayanto muni vrataha samahita dhiya sarva etadabhya shatadrita. My dear princess, in the form of a prayer, I have delineated the yoga system of chanting. All of you should take this important stotra within your minds and promise to keep it in order to become great sages. By acting silently like a great sage and by giving attention and reverence, you should practice this method. So Lord Shiva, he describes these prayers as yogadesham. Yogadesham means instructions in yoga. And Vishwanath Chakravarti says that having obtained these prayers called yogadesham. So he calls, Vishwanath Chakravarti says, it means that these prayers are also called yogadesham. Srila Prabhupada comments that Lord Shiva is indicating that the recitation of these prayers is as good as performing Ashtanga Yoga, which was in the Satyug, that was the recommended path. So when Lord Shiva is saying that I have delineated these prayers called Yogadesham, he is indicating that they are at the same level as Ashtanga Yoga. So the Prachetas will actually combine both the process. So they will submerge themselves under water for 10,000 years and go into a yogic trance. They have to be in yogic trance to live underwater for 10,000 years. They will cease any material activities, and then they will essentially follow the instructions of Lord Shiva and recite and meditate on these prayers. So as we know from the study of Bhagavad Gita, that yoga in itself is essentially a means to an end. The yogi could be very well be meditating on the impersonal Brahman, could be meditating on Paramatma, or as Lord Kapila indicates in 3rd canto, that he could be meditating on the form of Krishna. So Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, this is the last verse in the 6th chapter, Yoginam api sarvesham advatinam taratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam samayukta tamo mata. He says that Yoginam api, that of all the yogis, the best is one who shraddhavan bhajate yomam, who with faith he sings my glories. Bhajate yomam samayukta tamo mata. So this is the position of the Prachetas, that while they're performing the Ashtanga Yoga, they're essentially chanting these prayers to meditate on Krishna. In addition, Lord Shiva says that you be Muni Vrata. So Muni Vrata could mean that you should be fixed in this vow. So what is the vow? That Lord Shiva says that chant these prayers within your mind and with great attention and reverence follow it. So take that vow. So that is Munivrata. Munivrata also means vow of silence. So Srila Prabhupada expands on this word Munivrata, that vow of silence means that one should not speak anything except for Krishna Katha. So it does not mean the silence of not speaking. In his book Journey Back Home, Radhanath Maharaj, he writes about that how he went to some place in Himalayas and there was this Mani Baba over there, and there was a board over there saying that he hasn't spoken a single word in 20 years. And then there was another Baba there who was probably his disciple. He has not spoken a single word in 10 years. So Maharaj writes that he was sitting there, basically observing them, trying to take inspiration from them. And then he notices after some time, the Mani Baba, he takes a board, he takes a chalk, he writes something, and he gives it to the other Baba. And the Baba takes that board, writes something, and gives it back. And then he writes something and gives it back. And the Maharaj was saying that that's not Mani, that's not Mon. We are communicating, but using different method. And now people may use cell phones to communicate. So Prabhupada says Mauna means that one only speaks in the glories of Krishna. So he says this is the silence of Maharaj Ambarish. Savai Mana Krishna Padarvindyo Vachamsi Vaikunta Gunavratame. King Ambarish always fixed his mind on the lotus feet of the Lord and talked of him only. So that is the real Monivrata. Okay, next verse, 72. Idama purashmakam Bhagwan Vishwasarpatihi Bhragvadinam Atmajanam Sisrikshaha Samsikshkashtam. This prayer was first spoken to us by Lord Brahma, the master of all creators. The creators headed by Bhrigu were instructed in these prayers because they wanted to create. So Lord Shiva achieves two purposes in this verse. First, he establishes the authenticity of the prayer by describing its origin. So he's saying that the prayer was first spoken by Lord Brahma, who is a Prajapati, who is born from Lord Vishnu, who is the head of a Vaishnava Sampradaya. Right? So that gives authenticity to the prayer. We also see his humility. That Lord Shiva himself has the same position as Lord Brahma. He's the head of the Rudra Sampradaya, very, very exalted personality. And even though he appeared, it said, personalities like Lord Shiva, and even though they appeared to Brahma, it does not mean that they were depending on Brahma for their appearance. It's just like a king may go in through a door and somebody may open the door to allow the king to enter, but that does not mean the king is dependent on that person to enter. The king remains the king. So personalities like Lord Shiva, out of humility, they take this position. They say that I'm the son of Brahma, I'm inferior to Brahma. But here he is showing that humility and establishing the credibility of the prayers, not by saying that I have sung it, but by saying that it was first spoken by Brahma. Second point is that Lord Shiva says that when Brahma got it, he gave it to the Prajapatis. So the sons of Brahma, like Bhrigu and Pulastya, they're all exalted sages and Prajapatis, whom Brahma had delegated the task to create in the universe. So this talks about the potency of the prayer for one who's engrossed in material duties. Because the process of creation is very strongly in the mode of passion. Same thing is applied to Brahma also, more so to the Prajapatis, that Brahma had first asked for protection from Lord Vishnu. That when I create the universe, may I not be overwhelmed by the mode of passion. Now, the Lord Brahma himself recites these prayers and gives it to the Prajapatis so that it can counteract the influence of the mode of passion. So Prabhupada says the material creation means material engagement. But material engagement can be counteracted if we always remember our relationship with the Lord. As that relationship is described in these prayers by Lord Shiva. In this way, we can constantly in touch with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, despite our engagement in the creation, we cannot be deviated from the path of Krishna consciousness. So this is also an inspiration for us, because more than Lord Brahma, more than the Prajapatis, we are vested in the modes, even though we are not creating universes or species, but we are more vested in the modes. So if they were able to get protection by chanting the Rudra Gita, we can also aspire to get the same kind of protection. Right? So that is the falshruti that Lord Shiva is communicating. Srila Prabhupada actually takes this and extends it to the Krishna conscious movement that has been preached through ISKCON. And the message he gives is that just like Brahma, just like the Prajapatis, they remained in their position and performed bhakti by somehow or the else staying in contact with Krishna. So the ISKCON he's saying, doing the same thing, that everyone is advised to continue in their position while performing bhakti. And Prabhupada gives two references. One he gives from Bhagavatam, first canto, Dharmaspanashrishta Pumsham Vishwaksena Kathasu Ya Nautpadayir Yadi Ratim Shramevahi Kevala. Basically that even if one is busy executing his occupational duty, his business is Krishna consciousness. But if somebody is perfectly executing their varnashram, but not following the process of Shravana Kirtan, then the result is Shramevahi Keval. Then it is just endeavor. And then Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita 1846 that Yata pravritin bhutanam yana sarvam idam tatam swakarmana tad abhicharya siddhim vidantati manava. That by the worship of the Lord, who is the source of all beings and who is all pervading, the man can, in the performance of his duty, attain perfection. So just practical instruction Prabhupada is giving, that one can remain in their jobs, in their ashrams, and still make spiritual progress. And this has been demonstrated by great personalities in the past, like the Prachetas, like Lord Brahma, like the Prajapatis. Okay. Next verse. Devayam nodita sarve praja sarge prajeshwaraha anena dvasta tamasa shishrakshmo vividha prajaha. When all the Prajapatis were ordered to create by Lord Brahma, we chanted these prayers in praise of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and became completely free from all ignorance. Thus, we were able to create different types of living entities. So, previously, Lord Shiva had stated that the prayers were given by Brahma to the Prajapatis to help them in the process of creation. And Lord Shiva in this verse expands on it that it helped them in two ways. It kept them free from ignorance. He says, Dhvasta tamasa. It destroyed ignorance and it gave them the inspiration and empowerment of how to do the creation. So the point that is made over here is that spiritual progress does not necessarily have to be at the cost of material achievements. Sometimes people look upon it as a zero-sum game, that if you turn the dial towards more spirituality, you have to give up your material aspirations or endeavor. So here, Lord Shiva is saying that the process of creation is being described as a material activity, an activity that is actually mode of ignorance, passion and ignorance. So by chanting these prayers, they were able to do that better. So it says it gave them inspiration and empowerment, right? So they were able to do the material activity better and at the same time make spiritual advancements. Prabhupada also uses this verse to show that the scriptures support creationism. So the two theories are, most of the religions, they support the theory of creationism, which means that all the species, including the human form, were created by the Lord. And the scientific process is evolutionism, which is essentially which is Darwinism, that life came in simpler forms and then gradually developed to more complex forms, so that way it evolved. So Prabhupada said, the fact that this verse is talking about the role of the Prajapatis in creating different types of living entities, it means that the scriptures are clearly supporting creationism. And then he says, the nonsensical theory of evolution is not applicable here. Srila Prabhupada also brings out another interesting point in the purport. He says that the creator will always be more intelligent than the created. So this means that Brahma is the most intelligent being in the universe, excluding Vishnu Tattva, of course, because he sits at the apex of the Visarga, at the secondary creation. So what it means is that when the universe was empty, the first being that entered into the universe was the most intelligent. And the Prajapatis were a little less, and then the ones who came from the Prajapatis were a little less. So Prabhupada says the modern notion of developing intelligence is thus refuted. The developing intelligence is that of collective wisdom, which is the more contemporary, that in every generation there are scientific advancements, there is a deeper understanding, and that then accrues to the next generation, which builds upon it, and then they are able to enhance it. So the intelligence of the modern day man is considered to be much, much higher than that of the predecessors or the ancestors by this theory of developing intelligence. Prabhupada says that this creationism, it refutes that notion of developing intelligence. Okay, verse 74. Athedam netyada yukto japannava hitah puman achiraksheha apnoti vasudeva parayanaha. A devotee of Lord Krishna, whose mind is always absorbed in him, who with great attention and reverence chants this stotra, prayer, will achieve the greatest perfection of life without delay. So far, Lord Shiva was talking about the material as well as spiritual benefits of this prayer. Now, he simply talks about the spiritual benefit. So he says that these prayers are so potent that when they are chanted by the devotees of Krishna, Vasudeva, so it says Vasudeva Parayana. Vasudeva Parayana means one who has taken shelter of Vasudeva. So they will grant them perfection. What is the perfection for the devotees of Krishna? Is attaining the service of Krishna, attaining the association of devotees. So what if the others chant, those who are not devotees of Krishna? The implication is they will become devotees and they will also acquire the same perfection. So Lord Shiva, again, out of humility, he is glorifying his praise through the devotees. Right? He says that this prayer is an ornament because it is adorned by the devotees. And that's why he's specifically calling out Vasudeva Parayana. Like earlier on, he said that this prayer is potent because it was spoken by Brahma. Now he's saying that this prayer is potent because devotees chant it. Like somebody is saying that what's special about Hare Krishna Mahamantra? You can say many things, but then you can say Prabhupada chanted it. Right? That's what makes it special. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur chanted. So, because they are established in their purity and in their greatness, they become an ornament adorning the Mahamantra. Also, it indicates that those who sincerely chant this will become devotees and will also acquire perfection. So Prabhupada comments that perfection and being devotee, they are synonymous, meaning that only those who are devotees can be perfect. So Prabhupada says that perfection means becoming a devotee of Lord Krishna. As stated in 1:28, Vasudeva Paraveda, Vasudeva Paramaka. The ultimate goal of life is Vasudeva or Krishna. Any devotee of Lord Krishna can attain all perfection, material gains and liberation simply by offering prayers to him. This is essentially Prabhupada paraphrasing the Akama Sarvakamo Vimoksha Kamudari. There are many varieties of praise to Lord Krishna, chanted by great sages and great personalities, such as Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. Lord Krishna is known as Shiva Vrinchinutam. Shiva means Lord Shiva, Vrinchi means Lord Brahma. Both of these demigods are engaged in offering praise to Lord Vasudeva Krishna. If we follow in the footsteps of such great personalities and become devotees of Lord Krishna, our lives will become successful. Unfortunately, people do not know this secret. Nate vidu swartha gatim hi Vishnu. They do not know that the real interest and the highest perfection of life is to worship Lord Vishnu Krishna. It is impossible to become satisfied by trying to adjust the external energy. Without being a devotee of the Lord, one can only be baffled and confused. It's a very nice purport Prabhupada talks about glorifying devotion, devotees, and the special position that exclusive position that they occupy. Verse 75. Shreyasham niha sarvesham jnanam niha shreyesham param sukham tarati dushparam jnanano ravyasanarnavam. In this material world, there are different types of achievements. But of all of the achievement, but of all of them, the achievement of knowledge is considered to be the highest, because one can cross the ocean of nations only on the boat of knowledge. Otherwise, the knowledge is impassive. Otherwise, the ocean is impassive. So we see Prabhupada quotes in the purport, Bahunam Janmanamante Jnanavan Ma Prapadyante, that when one actually becomes wise, he surrenders to Krishna. Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatmas Durlabha. That such a great soul is very rare to be found. And actually, Prabhupada, for some reason, he quotes this verse 3 times in the Falshruti. Bringing attention to the glories of being a devotee. And so this is actually the 3rd time Prabhupada quotes this verse in the purport. So the knowledge that is being glorified here is not Gyan as in Gyan Kanda, but it is the knowledge that leads to the surrender to Krishna, essentially beginning with Sambandha Gyan. It is knowledge. It's not about the knowledge about the working of the material universe, not about knowledge of chanting various mantras, but it is Sambandha Gyan that leads one to surrender to Krishna. Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad, he has a slightly different interpretation on this verse. He says that Lord Shiva speaks this verse only to glorify knowledge. So as per Vishwanath Chakravarti's translation, Lord Shiva is saying that this knowledge is supreme bliss. It implies that it transcends the bliss of the personal form of Krishna. And then this knowledge is the boat that is suitable to cross the samsara. Samsara is the ocean of material existence. Right? Generally, we say that the lotus feet of the Lord are the sturdy boat that help one cross the ocean of samsara. But as per Vishwanath Chakravarti, Lord Shiva is saying that this is the knowledge, Gyan, this is the knowledge that helps one cross over the ocean of nation. And this knowledge gives one the bliss that exceeds the bliss of the personal form. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti goes ahead and says that Lord Shiva is actually wrong. And he gives two verses to contradict the statement by Lord Shiva. So he quotes 12.5, which says that those whose minds are attached to the unmanifest, impersonal feature of the Supreme Lord, advancement is very troublesome. Right? This is Krishna answering Arjuna's question of what happens to one who are attached to the impersonal form. It's very difficult, right? And he quotes an earlier verse in the 22nd chapter of this 4th canto, that the ocean of nations is very difficult to cross because it is infested with many dangerous sharks. Although those who are non-devotees undergo severe austerities and penance to cross that ocean, we recommend that you simply take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, which are like boats for crossing the ocean. Although the ocean is difficult to cross, by taking shelter of his lotus feet, you will overcome all dangers. So sometimes we see that the acharyas, they seem to contradict the statement that is actually being made in the scripture. So where do we see that? We see that several times in Prabhupada's purports. If you read Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is saying Buddhi Yoga, and Prabhupada is saying Bhakti Yoga. Krishna is saying Karma Yoga, Prabhupada is saying Bhakti Yoga. The verse is saying Vishnu, Prabhupada is saying Krishna. So the way we understand it is that this apparent contradiction is done because the acharyas have access to the intent behind the statement. So when Krishna is glorifying Astanga Yoga and Prabhupada is actually criticizing it, the reason he's doing it is because Prabhupada understands that Krishna ultimately wants to take the devotee to the path of bhakti. So when Krishna is glorifying Astanga Yoga, he's also talking about the difficulty of Astanga Yoga. He's talking about the high probability of falling down in Astanga Yoga. So because acharyas have access to this guhyam artha, this secret meaning, and out of compassion, one might say that then why don't the acharyas allow Krishna to take it the way he's doing? But they're doing it out of compassion. It's like the mother sometimes will chew the food and give it to the child because the food in its original form may not be digestible by the child. See that not so much in humans, but see that more in animals, that they will chew the food and give it to the child for ease of digestion. So same way, the acharyas, they are chewing and extracting the inner meaning and presenting it to the reader. For instance, sometimes a child is very angry, and the mother asks the child, "What's going on? Are you angry?" And the child says, "No, I'm not angry." Now the mother, she knows the mood of the child, right? So she'll say, "Okay, please don't be angry." Right? And somebody might say, "But he's saying I'm not angry. Why are you saying don't be angry?" But factually, the mother reads beyond the words, right? So that's the special relationship between the acharya. So that's the reason that commenting on the verses requires a strong level of attachment. So it said the devotee should be thoughtful and faithful at the same time. So being faithful means that staying true to the statements of the acharyas. And thoughtful means that while staying true to the statements, expanding on it. Right? So when we give classes, then that's what we always try to do. That we try to understand what is the message, try to be true to that message, and then we expand it by giving contemporary examples or according to the level of the devotees, bring in other related pastimes. So that's the thoughtful and the faithful mood that the devotees follow in propagating the name or in propagating the message by the Lord or the representatives of the Lord. Okay, moving on to verse 76. Ya imam shraddhaya yukto matgitam bhagvatstavam adhiyano duraradyam harimaradhyatyasau. Although rendering devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and worshipping Him are very difficult, if one vibrates or simply reads the stotra, prayer, composed and sung by me, he will very easily be able to invoke the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that, therefore, in this verse, Lord Shiva speaks about bhakti. So remember, Vishwanath Chakravarti in the previous verse was saying that Gyan is the way to attain the Lord. And then he's saying it is very difficult to follow the process of Gyan. Therefore, Lord Shiva is recommending one to practice the process of bhakti. So the word duradhyam means very difficult. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad, he applies it to Hari, qualifying Hari, to indicate that bhakti can conquer the Lord who is difficult to conquer. Srila Prabhupada applies Duradhyam to worship, indicating that the process of bhakti is very difficult. And in the purport, Prabhupada explains that bhakti is not difficult per se, because that's a point that is made so many times compared to karma, gyan. Bhakti is easiest. Prabhupada explains that bhakti is not difficult, but taking to bhakti is very difficult. Because taking to bhakti requires one to assume the position of a servant, to give up personal aspirations, material aspirations, but most importantly, give up ego. And when a person takes to bhakti, one of the first things he learns is that my position is to serve Krishna. After he's practicing for some more time, then he learns that my position is to serve those who are serving Krishna. And then finally he says that my position is to serve somebody who's serving Krishna. Right? So this is the advancement that one makes in bhakti. So every time one person goes one level lower than being direct contact of Krishna, the ego is being destroyed further and further. Right? Because everybody wants to begin with, in the conditioned situation, the jiva wants to be Krishna. If he's fortunate to take to bhakti, then he wants to be a gopi who's consorting with Krishna, or one of the friends of Krishna, that is playing with the forest. But those positions are taken. They're not, those are nitya siddhas. Prabhupada Maharaj said there are not even jiva tattvas, they're shakti tattvas. They're different categories You can't, just like a Jiva Tattva cannot become Vishnu Tattva, cannot become Shakti Tattva. So what are the positions available? Of serving those who are serving those who are serving those who are serving Krishna. So that's why Prabhupada says that Durathyam applies to Bhakti, because it involves giving up your ego, which is very difficult. So both meanings are giving their own realization. Vishnu Chakravarti says that Duradhyam means that Bhakti conquers the Lord who is very difficult to conquer, right? And then we nectar devotion, we see that we see that Krishna is reluctant to give Bhakti because through Bhakti one can control Krishna, right? So both of them are equally inspiring. So in both the cases, the potency of the stotra is being glorified. That by chanting the stotra, one attains bhakti, which is very difficult to attain, and one attains the Lord who is very difficult to attain. So Prabhupada says that the worship of the demigods is not very difficult. But becoming a devotee of Lord Vasudeva is not easy. However, if one adheres to the principle and follows in the footsteps of the higher authorities, as advised by Lord Shiva, one can easily become a devotee of the Lord. This is also confirmed by Prahlad Maharaj. Devotional service cannot be practiced by a mental speculator. Devotional service is a special attainment which can be acquired only by a person who has surrendered unto a pure devotee. As confirmed by Prahlad Maharaj, Mahisham Padarajo Abhishekam Nishkinchanam Na Vrinita Yavat. Unless one accepts the dust of the lotus feet of a pure devotee, who is free from all material contamination, one cannot enter into the devotional service of the Lord. Okay. I have a few more verses before this chapter finishes, so I'd rather go finish the chapter and then take a break. Verse 77. Vindate purusho mushma yadyadichatya satvaram madgita gita supritaj shrehashame kavallabha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the dearmost objective of all auspicious benedictions. A human being who sings this song sung by me, can please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such a devotee, being fixed in the Lord's devotional service, can acquire whatever he wants from the Supreme Lord. So Lord Shiva here says that one who sings this prayer that has been sung by me. In the previous verse, he had said that if one simply sings or reads this song composed and sung by me, which is an apparent contradiction, because earlier he said that this prayer was first sung by Lord Brahma. So neither Prabhupada nor Vishwanath Chakravarti comment on it. So I'm not sure how do we resolve it. One understanding is that a song, of course, is clear that anybody can sing it. Composed essentially could mean that he has taken that prayer from Lord Brahma and is presenting it to the Prachetas. But like I said, neither Prabhupada nor Vishwanath Chakravarti actually comment on it. So in this verse, Prabhupada is saying, Lord Shiva is saying that a human being who sings this song sung by me can please the personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada says that Yam Labdva cha param labham manyate nadikam tata, that if one can attain the favor of the personality of Godhead, he has nothing to aspire for, nor does he desire any other gain. And Mahaprabhu says, Jivera Sarupa Krishna Nitya Das, that every living entity is the eternal servant of the Lord. Therefore, when one engages in the service of the Lord, he realizes the highest perfection. And so this is the prayojan of the prayer. That what is the benefit of chanting this prayer? One becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. And Prabhupada says that there is nothing higher than that. That one's desires are fulfilled simply by engaging in the Lord's service. Now, there is no distinction being made over here between material and spiritual desires. Right? So one of the things that comes through these prayers is, and this is a theme that Lord Shiva makes when he talks about the Prajapatis and Brahma, that when one sings these prayers, then one attains both material as well as spiritual perfection. Okay, verse 78. Idam yakalya utthaya pranjali shraddhayanvitaha shanuyat shravayen matyo muchyate karma bandhanaha. A devotee who rises early in the morning and with folded hand chants these prayers sung by Lord Shiva and gives facility to others to hear them, certainly becomes free from all bondage to fruitive activities. So Prabhupada in the purport explains that mukti is one being freed from fruitive activities. And bhakti delivers that mukti. Right? So generally speaking, mukti means liberation. So either entering the Brahman or entering the heavenly planets. In this context, mukti means so being freed of fruitive activities means you're no longer caught up in the cycle of karma, and only bhakti has the ability to deliver it. So devotional activities are done under superior authority, which is why the performer does not accrue any reactions. Right? So the example is that of Arjun. That Arjun was performing material activities, but under a spiritual authority. So even though he was killing in the battlefield, he was not accruing any reaction. So Prabhupada in the purport says that in the Bhagavatam it is said that mukti means giving up all other activities and being situated in one's constitutional position. In the conditional stage, we are engaged in one fruitive activity after another. Karma bandhan means the bond of fruitive activity. As long as one's mind is absorbed in fruitive activities, he has to manufacture plans for happiness. The Bhakti Yoga process is different. For Bhakti Yoga means acting according to the order of the Supreme Authority. When we act under the direction of the Supreme Authority, we do not become entangled by fruitive results. Right? So this is the advantage of Bhakti. Okay. Last verse. Geetam mayedam naradeva nandanaha parasya pumsha paramatmana stavam japanta ekagra diyastapo maha charadvam ante tatapshyate pshitam. My dear sons of the King, the prayers that I have recited to you are meant for pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supersoul. I advise you to recite these prayers, which are as effective as great austerities. In this way, when you are mature, your life will be successful, and you will certainly achieve all your desired objectives without fail. So Vishnu Chakravarti says Tapu Mahat means undertake great austerities. So as Vishnu Chakravarti, Lord Shiva is saying that you recite these prayers and undertake great austerities. And Srila Prabhupada says, Lord Shiva is saying that these prayers that you're reciting are as good as great austerities. The conclusion is that you will achieve all your desired objectives. So Lord Shiva is aware that the Prachetas are doing this on the order of Maharaj Prachinabhari to have a suitable progeny. So he's not dissuading them from that material objective. He's saying you will get that, and you will also be able to get your spiritual perfection. Right? So, so this is when the Prachetas actually, after this, the Prachetas actually disappear for 5 chapters, and they will reappear in the 30th chapter. So in the intermediate 5 chapters, we will see that while the Prachetas are performing these austerities, Narad Muni goes to their father, Prachinabhari, and gives him instructions through the allegorical story of Puranja. Okay, so this ends the Rudra Gita ki jai, and we'll pause and see if there are any discussion.
Hare Krishna. A very simple clarification question. We did see a lot of prayers, but in our ISKCON, at least maybe my negligence or my limited knowledge, I never heard about Rudra Gita, any bhajan or anything. Is it?
You never heard about Rudra Gita?
No. Having within our ISKCON, any acharya, prior acharya having basically reciting Rudra Gita.
Actually, reciting Rudra Gita, even I haven't heard. In one way, the Bhagavatam is a collection of prayers. All of them are exalted.
Yeah.
Right. So it's possible that there are some devotees who are attached to it and do it, but you're right. It's not something that is. I haven't ever seen it done. But there are so many prayers, right? There's prayers by Kunti Devi, prayers by the demigods, prayers by Prahlad Maharaj, prayers I've seen them recited.
Prahlad Maharaj, Dhruva.
Yeah.
You mentioned Rudra Gita was originally the Lord Shiva got it from Lord Brahma and then is reciting it. Is that what it is?
That's what Lord Shiva says. That I heard this from Lord Brahma.
But still, it is called Rudra Gita, although it's Lord Brahma who was the original source.
Correct. And it may be because Lord Shiva popularized it. But his teaching to the Prachetas is recorded in the Bhagavatam, so that's why it's called Rudra Gita. But the word Rudra Gita is more of an so it does not appear, as you see, it does not appear within the prayers itself. Right? Nowhere Lord Shiva says that now I will recite the Rudra Gita. It's more something that has been applied externally. That because Lord Shiva has sung it, it's called Rudra Gita.
So one more question, Prabhu. Like in verse 74, you said, who are not devotees, basically devotees of Krishna, they will also attain some perfection. Where you said like prayers are like is like these prayers are is like an ornament, right? So do you mean that if a person is a non-devote, is not devoted to Krishna, but is devoted to some other, like Shiva and all, and is that what it alludes to?
Right. Right. So the point that is made is that those who are devotees, when they recite it, they attain perfection. Those who are non-devotees, when they recite it, they also attain perfection. And the reason they attain perfection is that by reciting this prayer, they become devotees, and then they attain perfection. So another way of saying is that by reciting these prayers, one gets infested, one gets enthused in devotional service.
Just to clarify, Prabhu, this prayer that Lord Shiva is referring to obtained from Lord Brahma is not the same as what we see in our Bhagavatam in third canto, where Lord Brahma is praying to Lord Vishnu. I think that's different, isn't it?
That is. Yeah. So that prayer is between Brahma and Vishnu, right? Brahma appears and he's praying for the creative energy, so he's praying to Vishnu. This prayer is between Brahma and Prajapatis. The Brahma is teaching this praise to the Prajapatis so that they stay enthused in their material activities, which is creation, but also make spiritual advancement. So this is one theme that develops in this prayer consistently, that one who recites this prayer basically attains perfection both in the material endeavors and in the spiritual progress also, right? So Lord Shiva introduces it with this notion that the Prachetas, the Prajapatis did that. And then later on the Falshruti, he maintains that all your desires will be fulfilled. One achieves all kinds of success. Basically, the message is that Prabhupada explains that one attains both material as well as spiritual perfection.
That's kind of what to say, a misnomer type of thing, because one who attains spiritual perfection, he sees no materialism separately, and therefore the material perfection is also spiritual perfection, right? It's not maybe for a person who is outside, it might look like he is materially perfect and also spiritually perfect, but the spiritually elevated person, perfect person, doesn't see that way.
So this is the worm on the hook analogy, right? So because you're looking at it from the eye of a devotee, you say that this is misleading because material perfection is already included in spiritual perfection. So so it's redundant to state, or somebody might say that one who's making spiritual progress does not aspire for material perfection, right? So it is basically redundant to say that. The statement is still true, right? Even for devotee, the statement is true. Prabhupada gives the example of Arjuna, right? He attained material perfection and he pleased Krishna. But this is a worm on the hook that for one who is looking for material perfection, he may not be concerned about spiritual perfection that much. He's focusing on what can I do to make material advancements. That person will get attracted to these prayers and then make spiritual advancements while aspiring to get and actually getting his material aspirations.
Basically, you're saying that if a person is wanted to have a material perfection, he leads towards the austerities, and that leads him to the spiritual elevation, progress.
So in the context of, remember, this is the Falshruti for this prayer, right? So when the Falshruti is spoken, it is specifically meant to attract the minds of the people to that prayer. That by this prayer, you will attain all, all this. So Lord Shiva is giving this Shruti to attack the materialists to his prayer. If you recite Rudra Gita, you will get all your material aspirations fulfilled, right? So for them, the spiritual advancement may be a side effect. But in reality, what will happen is, as Nand Gopal Prabhu is saying, that the spiritual advancement will just become a part of material advancement. And that's why it is said that even if non-devotees take to it, they acquire perfection because they become devotees. Right? So there is a worm on the hook that attracts the materialist. They go after the worm, and under the worm, there is this hook of bhakti. And that's the one that ultimately traps them in a good way. That's the one that traps them. Okay. So if we don't have any more discussion, then I want to finish this chapter with a quick summary of the Rudra Gita that we began the chapter by expanding on the genealogical line of Maharaj Prithu. And it came down to, through his sons, it finally comes down to the king Baharishat. And Baharishat is described as being an expert in Karmakand. And he married Satadruti and had 10 sons, the Prachetas. The Prachetas were ordered by the father to perform austerities. So they went, they found a beautiful serene lake, which Prabhupada says is in the area where Lord Shiva stays. And then they meet Lord Shiva. And Vidura at this point is amazed that the Prachetas, without even praying for Lord Shiva, without even having any aspirations or desires to meet Lord Shiva, meet Lord Shiva. And given the fact that the audience of Lord Shiva is very difficult, that people perform austerities for a long time to get the audience of Lord Shiva. And then it's explained that Lord Shiva is actually attracted by the good qualities of the Prachetas. So the good qualities is their obedience, not to Lord Shiva, but to the orders of their own father, and their desire to perform devotional service, because they were heading there, even though for a material reason, they were heading there to perform devotional service. The point being that Lord Shiva is spontaneously attracted to devotees of Lord Vishnu, because he himself is an exalted devotee. So then Lord Shiva, out of happiness, seeing the Prachetas, says that I will now give these prayers by which you can get the favor of the Supreme Lord. Before that, Lord Shiva pays obeisances to the Chaturvyuha, the presiding deities, for purification. And he also gives prayers to the different devas like sun, moon, and Vayu. So this is all essentially the process of Bhuta Shuddhi, purifying oneself before one is ready to approach the Lord. So after going through this process of purification, Lord Shiva, then he describes the glorious form of the Lord. So we see him describe the face and the chest and the abdomen, the belly, all the way to the lotus feet. So after describing the Lord Shiva then glorifies Bhakti. So he glorifies Bhakti as the process by which the Lord is obtainable, that how Bhakti protects one from death, and how the association of devotees is special. So Lord Shiva speaks about the general three things that we speak about. He speaks about Bhakta, Bhakti, and Bhagwan. So he speaks about these three things, glorifies them. Then Lord Shiva speaks about the relationship between the Lord and the material creation. Right? And he says that he speaks that to attract the minds of the embodied soul because they are within the material creation. So they first want to see that how does the Lord relate to where we are. So it talks about how the Lord creates, maintains, and destroys. How as Paramatma he enters everybody's heart. How as time he destroys. How as the Purusha avatars he creates. And then Lord Shiva concludes the prayer with the Falashruti. That if you can, he says that the prayer is originated by Lord Brahma, given through disciplic succession, and one can attain the full favor of the Lord. One can cross over the ocean of nations. One can get all kinds of material benefits. One can attain anything that they desire by faithfully reciting these prayers. Okay, so that ends our chapter 24. We'll start with the next chapter, 25. So, chapter 25 is the description of the characteristics of King Puranjana. And it's a long chapter with 62 verses. Most of them have pretty long purports there. And it's, as most of you are aware of the story of Puranjan, it's basically a metaphorical description of the relationship of the jiva with the material world and the eventual emancipation of the jiva from the material to the spiritual world. So we will start with 425, 1. Maitre uvacha iti sandesya bhagvana bhahisade ravi pujitaha pashyatam rajaputrana tatreva tradadeharaha. The great sage Maitreya continued speaking to Vidur. My dear Vidur, in this way, Lord Shiva instructed the sons of King Barishat. The sons of the king also worshipped Lord Shiva with great devotion and respect. Finally, Lord Shiva became invisible to the princes. So Maitreya has been reciting the genealogy of Swayambhavu Manu. Right? So he's been systematically going through the list of the descendants. He comes down to from Prithu to Prachinabari and explains how he married Shatadruti, had 10 sons from her called the Prachetas, and the Prachetas, by the order of the father, to have qualified children, left to perform austerities. So in the previous chapter, verse 15, Maitreya had said that when all the sons of Prachinabari left home to execute austerities, they met Lord Shiva. So then at this point, Vidura, he interrupts Maitreya with amazement to ask, how did the sons of Prachinabari get the audience of Lord Shiva? So that question caused Maitreya to take a detour. So he was coming down, a descendant, and when Maitreya hears this, and Vidur, when he hears this, he asks the question that how did they get the audience of Lord Shiva? So then he takes this detour into Rudra Gita. That this is how they got, so the whole pastime of Lord Shiva coming and instructing the Rudra Gita. Now that he has finished explaining that the pastime, the detour is over. Now, Maitreya is back to his original line of speaking, which is talking about Maharaj Prachinabhari and his descendants. So, in 5 chapters, Maitreya will relay the confidential conversation between Narad Muni and Prachinabhari. And then after that, he will, because through Prachinabhari come the Prachetas, now he will again return his attention to Prachetas as descendants of Prachinabhari, right? And talk about the Prachetas, talk about the son of Prachetas, which is Taksha. So then he will further go down that genealogy, but he doesn't go further down after that. That pretty much is the end of the 4th canto. And after that, that's the end of the conversation between Maitreya and Vidur also. So what does the verse say? That after Lord Shiva imparted the Rudra Gita to the Prachetas worshipped Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva disappeared as the Prachetas watched. So the Prachetas then followed through the instructions of Lord Shiva to perform austerities. So one point that is made over here, Prabhupada makes, is that the Prachetas, even though this was the first time they were heading out of the house, first time obviously they were meeting Lord Shiva, but they were already well trained. The fact that they were going to perform austerities under the water means that they had already mastered many angas of yoga. So Prabhupada glorifies this. He says that it is very clear how the kings and the princes were trained to take charge of a kingdom. So charge of a kingdom does not mean being trained in warfare or administration, also spiritual training. That is evident from Prachetas, that they were already trained in praying, in performing austerities. So they were ready to follow through the instructions of Lord Shiva. So in one of the GBC meetings, there was an exercise that was done, that each of the GBC member had to give one word that would improve the entire movement. And different sannyasis or different members gave different words. And the word that Radhanath Maharaj gave was training. Training is one thing that can across the board help the movement. And it is more potent coming from him because the success of the Chopati temple is almost entirely based on a very strong training program. I think the Brahmachari program in Chopati is so sought after. I hear that they have a long waiting list of people waiting to get into it. And entry into the Brahmachari program is also very difficult. Most of the people are not allowed to enter. But the training that they give is very good. And most of the devotees after Brahmachari, they are encouraged to take on Grihastha ashram. So it's not that they're kept in Brahmachari, and they're encouraged to go out and get a job. But now empirical evidence is that they do very well, not just in Grihastha ashram, but also in their jobs and also in their spiritual progress. So the foundation is strong training, and the reverse also. Without proper training, difficult. So there is another important reason for Narad Muni to come and preach to Prachinabhari. Prabhupada says that when the great sage Narad saw that a descendant of Maharaj Dhruva was being misled by fruitive activities, Narad took compassion on him and personally came to instruct him. So when Prachinabhari was earlier on introduced, then his defining characteristics was that he performed so many yagyas that he covered the entire face of the earth with kushagrams. And before he could finish one yagya, he would start another yagya. And all these were karmakanda yagyas. So that's what he was an expert in. So when Narad saw that this is a person who was very qualified, but was so absorbed in karmakanda, but he was especially affectionate to him because he was connected to his dear disciple, Dhruva Maharaj. So that is why Narad Muni takes compassion on him. So talks about the potency of being related to a devotee. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would say that even the dogs in the village of Kulin Gram will be delivered. And we see that he gave mercy to Amogha, who was not very favorable, but he gave mercy to Amogha just because he was the son-in-law of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And Krishna gives mercy to Kaliya only because of the prayers of Nagapatni. Kaliya was not even asking for anything. He was still trying to bite Krishna. And Krishna, even though Banasur is trying to kill Krishna, Krishna does not kill him because of his connection with Prahlad Maharaj. And so it talks about the potency and glory of becoming a devotee, not just for yourself, but for those who come before you or will come after you. In 9.2 Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, he glorifies transcendental knowledge as Rajvidya Rajabhuyam. So Rajvidya is translated as king of knowledge. But it can also be translated as knowledge of the kings. So the sages were particularly interested in instructing the kings because of their enormous influence on the people in general. And we see that Buddhism was almost extinct in India until Ashoka became a Buddhist. And when Emperor Ashoka became a Buddhist, then his whole kingdom became Buddhist. At that time, his kingdom spread all the way, actually even past, it spread to Indonesia, so even past Sri Lanka, right? It spread across the Indian Ocean. So kings had enormous influence on the people. So the sages were particularly, because of that potency, they were interested in instructing the kings. So that's another reason why Narad Muni comes to instruct Maharaj Prachinabhari, because at that time he was the emperor of the entire world. Okay. Prem Kishore Prabhu, you may want to mute yourself.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do one more verse and then after that we can pause. So verse number 2, it's a short verse. Rudra Gita Bhagavataha Stotram Sa Viprachetashaha Japantaste Tapaste Pu Varshnanamayutam Jale. All the Pracheta princes simply stood in the water for 10,000 years and recited the prayers given to them by Lord Shiva. So Prabhupada again makes the point that because this was Satyug, the life span of the people were very long, lived for 100,000 years. So it's like taking 10% of the life and devoting it exclusively for spiritual advancement. So like somebody in the current day and age who is aspiring to live for 100 years takes 10 years and exclusively sets it aside for spiritual advancement. And also because Satyug, where people had greater potencies, they were well trained, so they were able to perform this seemingly difficult act. Prabhupada says, in the modern age, one may be amazed how the princess could stand in water for 10,000 years. However, living within air or living within water is the same process. One simply has to learn how to do it. The aquatics live within water for their whole lifespan. Certain favorable conditions are created to enable them to live within water. In those days, our people used to live for 100,000 years. Out of so many years, if one could spare 10,000 years for the sake of austerity, he could be assured of success in his future life. This was not very astonishing. Although such a feat is impossible in this age, it was quite possible in Satyuga. Okay, so I'll pause here and see if we have any comments.
So regarding the brahmachari training program of Chaupati, recently Gauranga Prabhu visited us and he was mentioning that they have stopped it now. They are not going to take any brahmachari as a full-time, long-term brahmachari, but they are allowing brahmacharis to come for 1 year. For 1 year as a, what do you call, internship or something like that, and then they go out. That's it. They won't be allowed to stay in the ashram forever. So that's what Gauranga Prabhu was telling. So just want to pass on the information. That's all.
I didn't know that. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know.
And another thing is, it's interesting that Prachini Barishat, although lived in Satyayuga, he was performing yagyas, not the meditation, but mostly the karmakanda yagyas, and he advised his sons to perform austerities. Although he was trying to enjoy his life to the max. So it's interesting that how the father, not being an example, but expecting the sons to perform the austerities. That's something that I was thinking that. So therefore, Narada Muni came to correct him, correct his course of action.
So Prachinabhati is actually, he is described as a Prajapati. So he is a very prominent personality. He is not considered to be like one of the other descendants, but because of his outstanding position, he is elevated to the position of a Prajapati. And one of the reasons why he's considered this is because of his so it's not just the performance of Karmakand, but because he was very expert in performing Karmakand. Right? So he was doing it so perfect. And later on, Narada Muni says that even though you're expert, but you're still making mistakes. That's the nature of Karmakand. The person make mistakes. But I mean, your point is well made. That I don't know the answer to that. That if he was in Satyug, then the recommended path is that of dhyan. But he had a strong affinity to Karamkand. See, we see the same thing in Daksha also, right? Even Daksha in his previous birth, he was born in Satyug, but he also had a very strong affinity to Karamkand. Maybe it's something to do with being a Prajapati. But because they're creating offsprings, progenies, they have to focus more. Same thing happens with Daksha too also, right? He sends his sons to perform austerities. And then Narada Muni intercepts them and makes them devotees. But we see the same thing going on there. It's a good point.
Another thing, Prabhu, regarding Rudra Gita that we were discussing about why it's not well known in our ISKCON, that Prabhu was asking. It includes glorification of the demigods also, right? Isn't it? Could it be one of the reasons why it was not? Because other prayers don't have that component of glorifying.
Could be. So it's apparent glorification of demigods. Like when we were reading it, then we understood by Vishwanath Chakravarti and Prabhupada's purport that it's like the gopis following Katyayani Vrata. So Lord Shiva is glorifying the Antakarna deities so that his senses can be purified to pray to Krishna. But for one who is not able to have access to the meanings, the inner meanings, it could be misinterpreted as that there is glorification. So what Prabhupada actually has done is, in the translation, and that's another point that I was making, that sometimes acharyas, they translate seemingly in a different way. So what Prabhupada has done is, wherever the demigods come, he has replaced that with the Supreme Lord. So if you read the translation out of the Gita, except for a few places, it will always appear that Lord Shiva is praying to Lord Vishnu. But if you look at the Sanskrit, then that comes out a little bit more clearly. And maybe possible, that's one reason, the sannyasis or, the Vaishnava acharyas, they don't strongly recommend this prayer because there's a possibility of confusion. Okay, so if there is no more discussion, we can stop here and we'll continue with our discussion next week. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Yethai Gaur Premanand.